Thanks for stopping by, guys, and welcome to Sprocket. Now, if you've never heard what Sprocket is, it is a purpose-built tank building game where you get to build your own tanks, kit them out with guns, engines, transmissions, armor, everything you can think of, and then take them into scenarios or just goof around with them in this little sandbox area. And it's actually quite a bit of fun, and I've been testing around with it. Now, this tank here is my Mark 26D, which is kind of my main MBT that I've been using. And for the most part is a mid-war, late-war design that can do most of those scenarios. Other than like the World War I era stuff, it can do most of that. So one complaint with the game is it has no tutorial for it. So building a tank like this, you kind of have to figure out on your own. And today we're actually going to build a quick tank, something that is, well, functional for this game. I'm not going to go for any sort of historical accuracy, more so function over anything. So first things first, whenever you get into the build menu, you will get a new design. Looks something like this. It'll have whatever version you're working on. And this is a pretty awful tank to start off with. One, it's already almost 40 tons. You look up here in top right. And we're going to be aiming for about 25 to about 33 tons is where we want this to end up. Now then, on the left you have base, mobility, firepower, crew, library. And for each of these on the right you have things like hull, turret, and then a bunch of sliders with armor, shape, things like that you can play with. First thing I'm going to do, go to my base hull armor and get rid of all this armor. Bring us down to roughly 29 tons, which is right about what we're aiming for anyway. Now the second thing we're going to do is something with the mobility. I see a lot of people mess around with this and build really outrageous engines and transmissions when at the end of the day you really don't need anything truly special. Engines, here you just have heavy, medium, light. This is the basic. We're not going to mess around with that. We're going to go to the advanced. I want an 8-cylinder. It is for the most part fine. You can go higher or lower depending on what you need, but you will see it will take up internal space and it should increase our tonnage. For a light vehicle like this, about 25 tons, an 8-cylinder, and we're going to aim for about a 3-liter. Now the things to note when you're actually setting up your engine, whatever these numbers are, doesn't really matter all too much from what I've experimented with. What you do need to focus on is this max RPM as well as target and min. So max RPM is 32. We're going to tell its target max is 31, give or take. That means whenever it gets up to 31, it will try and upshift if there's a gear available. And for target min, we're going to set that at about 25. That means it should downshift at about 25,000 if there is a gear available. Or I should say 2,500, correction. And from what I understand, this will set your idle speed. So if you're not moving, it'll idle at that speed. I've never really messed with it. And to my knowledge, the full fuel usage and the power usage sliders are just for measurement. I don't think they actually affect any stat. They just tell you at this RPM, that's your horsepower output. I don't think it actually affects much. So, now that we have that, let's go over to transmission, which is going to be our next most important thing. And it starts you off with an 8-gear transmission. I never use the 8 gears, so we're going to knock that down to a 5-gear, and our reverse is going to be 3-gear. The reason I do this is because it removes so much internal space and so much weight, meaning your transmission, if we click on the top bar here, engine, transmission, take up quite a bit of your space, other than right now my turret basket is the biggest thing. And of my tonnage, my transmission is 27%, and the engine is, well, actually quite small. So the reason I do this is mostly weight savings and, well, making a light tank. The gear you really need to worry about is this 5th gear here. I'm going to test it at 0.7, 0.9, and since we're already pretty close to our target tonnage, I'm going to basically use this for weight testing, then we can mess with the armor later. We need to do a few things before we even make this thing drive. Crew, viewports, driver viewport. Slap that down. That gives us a driver and allows us to actually move this tank now. So what I'm worried about here is in the top left. You'll see left gear, right gear are both at 5. I'm hitting 11 miles an hour, and my RPM is a little bit lower than I want it to be. It's at about 900 RPM, which means my gear ratio is not good enough. So let's head back over to mobility, transmission. I'm actually going to leave that. I'm going to bring my 4th gear closer. So hopefully when we're doing all this off-roading stuff, it'll stay in 4th gear and use 5th gear only for high-speed situations. So right now we're stuck in 4th gear. Now we're in 5th because we're on a relatively flat ground. And you can see we're booking along at about 25 miles an hour. Now we're back in 4th gear. 5th gear. And there we go. So the main thing you want to look out for is you see the top, it says RPM 2000. I know my max RPM is 3200. You want to make sure in your highest gear you aren't peaking in past that max RPM, because past that you will start damaging your engine, which is not a good thing. For short periods of time, like if you're going downhill with the tank and you pick up too much speed and the RPM goes really high, that's one thing. But if you're constantly on that red RPM, you will eventually damage the engine, and is not a good thing if you are planning on using this tank for any of the missions. So now that we have our 5th and 4th gear pretty much set, these gears I'm not too worried about. We just kind of set them to give a nice gradual increase as we go through the gear ratios. And what we can do is copy from drive for our reverse gears, and then I'll actually just tweak them so that the 5th gear and 3rd gear here are a bit closer. You shouldn't need as much torque going in reverse. We shouldn't really be using reverse all too much. At this point, we have an 8-cylinder engine that can get us pretty much where we need to go and get us there decently fast. So, alright. Engine transmission done. Now, I'm not going to put any of the... so with the engine, you can put your exhaust and stuff. I'm not going to do any of that until I have the armor figured out. Next thing from here, we're going to ignore the tracks because that's mostly cosmetic at this point. We are going to head to armor and base. Now we're actually going to make the tank look like we want it to. So hull and turret shape. For the sake of this, we need to make an efficient tank, so I am going to drag this back, give us a nice front slope, and we'll pull this up, little thin nose there. You can play with all these sliders, but just grabbing around the tank and moving things according to where you want them is the easiest option that I've found. There are some things you really can't do by just grabbing. Really? Well, actually, check that. You can do the sponsons by grabbing. I didn't know that, apparently. Alright. So from here, we can pretty much build the tank to look like what we want it to look like. I'm actually going to keep these sides straight and flat. And for the most part, this looks about what I want it to. I'm not going to go into too crazy of a design with these slopes. Give a quick look around the tank. And I'm going to give these a nice sponson. Just because I can. There we go. That's our shape done. You can make it whatever you want, however you want. This is the very optional part. But what we do have to worry about is the armor. Now we... actually, let me change one thing. I'm going to bring this in. That's more the look I'm going for. Now, something I forgot to mention is as you change this, you will notice up here your internal space increases and decreases. That's just because the size of the tank is smaller or larger. Depending on the size of your tank, depends on how much stuff you can fit in it. So, I'm actually going to bring these back quite a bit, just for the extra room it'll give me. Now then, armor. Back to where we were. Belly, roof, doesn't really matter. I'm going to give a little bit of roof armor. That way if I do get at an angle, you can see how much armor I have there. Our goal here is essentially to be effective up to about 150 millimeters of armor. Because it's basically as powerful as what you're going to encounter in this game. The most powerful thing is a Panther, which I think has 172 millimeters of pen at point blank range. And at the ranges you're mostly going to engage it, it's really only going to pen 150, 160. So this upper plate, we need to bounce 150. That's 140. And you will notice because this is sloped, the higher we go on it, it will be less. But right about here, we got 126. Dial that up, 160. So I'm satisfied with that. Lower plate, mid. 120. 140. I'm happy with that. The front strip, tiny little area. I mean, we don't really have to armor this up too much. It's really unlikely something's going to hit there. Lower is what I like to beef up because I keep it mostly flat. And if you're coming up over a hill, it's going to be presented to the enemy pretty darn flat. Now the next, sides, upper, we're going to have that at a slight angle because we're going to be coming at the enemy straight on. We're not going to really angle our armor. We don't want to angle our armor. Just give us a little bit of protection just in case they get a slight side shot on us there. Rear, really don't care about the armor because if we're getting shot in the ass, we've already messed up. Turret, now we can actually do the turret shape. I'm going to first drag it backwards using forward offset. And now that we can armor this up, 15 millimeters, front, crank this up, 104, 120, and instead of armoring that up really high, I'm actually just going to make it smaller, making it less likely for them to hit it. So yes, it's not the perfect thickness, but it's a smaller target. On our cheeks, these can be 200, nope, way too thick. 160. My rule of thumb is I should be able to take a hit at 45. It's about 116. That's not bad. I would prefer better, but I'm not going to worry about it. And the roof, 106. 130. There we go, 190. And we're actually above our tonnage that I was hoping for. Roof, lower that. Now, since we are aiming for 25 tons, what I'm going to actually do is make this turret smaller. We really don't need this large of a turret. I think the next thing we need to worry about is this here, motor torque. Motor torque, we're going to crank that up a little bit. I like to get about 30 degrees a second. You will notice it takes up internal storage in our tank. So let's actually get 25. And it should be good enough. Diameter, we're going to crank that down. That's our turret ring diameter, make it smaller. So we're using less of our hull and more of our turret space. Essentially the turret ring diameter swaps hull space for turret space. Ability, firepower is our next thing. Always go with light mantlets. You can go with medium, heavy, whatever you want. Now, something I've seen a lot of people make mistakes with is when you click something, it'll put it in your place. And how you get rid of it is you just right click and it gets rid of it out of your hand. So this little mantlet, dead smack center. we're going to make the elevation rate a lot more powerful. Not that powerful. Let's give it about 5 degrees a second. If you have this elevation rate really high, you can get an almost stabilized turret. Almost keyword there. You really don't need it. And let's go ahead cannon. And now we're going to actually make the gun for it. Now then, probably the first thing I'm going to start off with is caliber. What caliber do you want your gun? I usually go with about a 60 caliber with a full length shell, which is 1 meter. And that'll give me about 130, actually, let's check. About 131 millimeters pen. Most things you're going to face, say, even like the Panthers and stuff, you're mostly dealing with 160 millimeters, I think, frontal armor. You might not be able to pen a Panther from the front, but you can pen just about anything else in the game. And really, I think anything past a 75 millimeters is really overkill if you're going with a full-length shell. If you're going like a half-length shell, maybe larger calibers, but 60 millimeters full-length shell. Something you do need to keep in mind is if you see this 95% burn-off, that tells you how long your barrel is, which mine is 4.8 meters, and how long it needs to be to burn 95% of your propellant, which is 1 meter. So my barrel's way too long right now. Go ahead and bring that back to about say 2.6 meters. And because even though it does burn 95%, you will still get a little bit more penetration if your barrel's a little bit longer, but it's not enough to really justify having that long of a barrel. Change the little barrel in just because it's aesthetic. Gunner sight, you do need one of these. Close to the gun is just better. Now, the other thing we do have to take into account is you will notice here's this little red half circle, I guess, is the gun's elevation. That's how much it can elevate and how much it can depress. And on the right, it should tell us max depression is -5 degrees. The reason for this is because we have a really fucking long shell and a really short turret. And that red line at the back is telling you where your turret, where the gun is hitting the top of your tank. That red line back there, it's hard to focus on. And the blue line, you will notice, tells us how our gun is balanced. So if we do this slider, start thickness, see the blue is behind the pivot point. If we bring that really far up, it'll come closer. And if we do end thickness up, it'll be really far out front. This affects how quickly we can elevate our gun. So let's balance our gun out a lot. And just basically moving sliders until, there we go, our gun is balanced. And now we have an 8.5 second elevation rate. And since we should have a gunner already in here, this is how our gun is moving. There we go. Ammo, we're going to store none of this in the hole. Put everything in the turret, and honestly, 50 rounds of AP. Shouldn't really need more than that. You can also type if you don't want to mess with the slider, and we'll take 20 rounds of APHE. Gun mount looks good, cannon looks good, ammo looks good. Next thing is crew. Now crew are placed by moving these little sights. So if I want my driver to be dead center, my gunner is going to sit right behind his sight. Commander's cupola. Something I should note is if you press shift and scroll wheel, you can change the size of these. So we're going to make this small, and we're going to put him behind the gunner. Like that. And even though it doesn't really, well actually, we're going to go ahead and put the antenna. This is so you can actually command other vehicles. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this at the beginning, but part of the reason we're aiming for a 25-ton weight is partially mobility, lightweight tank, fast speed. Also because how the game judges the cost of a tank. A tank costs how much it weighs. So with most of the missions, your tank can cost up to 100 tons. But what the game does is if you have like a 25-ton tank here, it divides that up. So if we got a 25-ton tank and the mission has a 100-ton limit, we get 4 tanks that can come into battle with us. The one that you're driving, as well as 3 AIs, and if your tank dies, you automatically swap out with one of the AIs. And that's why we're actually really going for that 25-ton weight. Okay, now we're in the crew. Place the antenna that allows us to command those AI tanks. Stowage, mostly decorative. Crew hatches, decorative. Lights, decorative. Utilities, decorative. Anti-infantry, decorative. So you can do whatever you want with that. What you do have to worry about here is the crew on the right-hand side. The commander here is in the turret, and his allocated space tells how efficient he is, and the commander will debuff everyone else in the tank if they don't. Will debuff them. So if he is operating at 45, they get a negative 13% debuff. If the commander just doesn't exist, they get a negative 50. So commander needs as much space as he has. Driver, I'm going to give him full space, and he's also going to be our radioman, because, well, honestly, his efficiency hasn't affected me much. The loader, give him full space. That way we get about a 4-second reload on this gun. Really nice reload. And the gunner, if we had the turret space, I'd give it to him, but for the sake of this, I'm going to give him about, how much can I give him? 95? Give him 95%. Actually, wait. Let's go back to base, turret, increase our turret ring, which will take some of our hull space, which we have a lot. And now we have enough room to give our gunner all the space he wants. Yay, he's happy now. Alright, now what do we have next to do? I think, at this point, this is a functional tank, a fully functional tank. What we can do instead is we're going to mess around with the tracks here. Layout just kind of allows you to customize where things are. Let's move that up. Let's go over to our fenders, move those forward like that. It also allows you to change what suspension type you have. So on the bottom, suspension, let's change your suspension type. Unless you're going for a replica, I'd stick with the very large torsion bars. They're pretty much the best thing the game has. Resting angle, we're going to make it a little bit higher up off the ground. Dampening, length. Now length and diameter will take up internal space. And honestly, we're going to tank the diameter, keep the length. This should make the suspension a lot spongier. So length, lower it, should stiffen it up. Now I'd call that good enough. And to explain what's going on, the longer the bar is, the easier it is to turn to torque. The smaller the bar is, the easier it is to torque. So if you need a really stiff suspension, short bars, large diameter. If you need a really soft suspension, long bars, short diameter. Simple enough. And at this point, I'm pretty sure this is like just straight up ready for combat if we wanted it to. And after this is just decoration. So we press Z. We can spawn, say, a Centurion. Let's see if he one-shots us or not. We should have enough armor for him. Actually, let's drive a little bit closer so he wakes up and realizes we're here. There he goes. She bounced a shell right there off the front. Alright, shot us twice, you're dead. There you go. And there you have a relatively efficient tank. Drives around decently well. Probably doesn't have the best climbing capabilities, but none of my tanks really ever have. There you go. And from here, we're pretty much just going to decorate this tank. So, time-lapse maybe? Quick note, since I forgot to say this, if you press X, it turns on mirror mode, and if you're ever looking at something, if you click Alt while looking at it, it'll duplicate the item. This is very useful if you're doing small things, so say if I want to size this up for whatever reason, and then I need another of that exact size, I can hit Alt, now I have another of the exact size. And I should also mention Q and E is rotate. And since I keep cutting in and out of this little time lapse that I'm trying to do, the engine components such as the exhaust and the vents will actually determine where your engine is placed. So if I put an exhaust, or a vent actually, back here, that will mean my engine gets placed back here. So you can actually put your engine up front if you want to use it for protection. And with your fuel, these little external filler caps will place the actual internal tanks. So if I want 2 tanks beside my driver, so that he is better protected from the sides, I can do so. And it'll actually split up the fuel. Hopefully I don't have to keep cutting back in and out of here every time I remember something I was supposed to say. Alright, so now we have a tank that is fully functional, has all its crew, has all of the needed things. The engine works fine enough. I could probably tweak it to do some nice stuff. Place decal, place it, and then right click on it, star. There we go. Nice American stars. And what we're going to do is we're going to save this Mark 48. And we're going to take this thing into battle. See how well it actually does in a fight. And since it is 24.5 tons, we should get 4 of these guys. So back to the main menu, and we're going to load into a scenario. And you will see in the scenario at the top right, you see the number 4, possible vehicles. Number of allied vehicles you have on this mission. Increase this by decreasing the cost of your vehicle, which is there. And I think if you click on it, hard limit is 10, and because we're using 25% of our allocated 100 tons, you get 4. So, hit space to play. You will see we have 4 of these. Now if we go to use these in combat. There's one that usually hides in a little ditch right over here. That's usually the last one you gotta kill. Where did I just take a shot from? Was it him? Yeah, that was him, and I also don't have a track. So, real quick, I'm going to, since I have a little bit of weight, I'm going to increase this upper. Now we are going to pass my 25 by a little bit. Turret, armor, front, bring that up. And we are past our 25, but we do have quite a bit of room. So, turret shape, bring that in a little bit. Full shape, bring this in. There we go. We're below the 25 weight limit. Everything's scrunched together a little bit, but it's all theoretically still functional. I turn the turret to the side there to get out. Mobility, tracks, road wheels, give a little bit more space. That way they're actually spread out. I'm going to save this as the new Mark 20 or Mark 48. There we go. Now let's try this one real quick. The same way, but we have a lot more armor. Splatter dead. Oh, someone took my track. I think that one. No. I just took his track. I don't think that one's dead, is it? Definitely is now. I'm shooting over these guys. That's King Tiger dead. Alright, let me go grab one that's still got its tracks on it. Actually gonna focus on the one that should be hiding over here. I think I've got all of them still. Because I upped the armor, they're a little bit safer actually. So I think all of my friendlies are still alive. Other than the one that, of course, lost its track. He's still alive, he just can't move. There he is. He's hiding in that ditch over there. You can see the top of him. Alright, do that. There he is. Oh, I just got shot from the rear. Turn. Come on, turn face. There we go, turn armor. There we go. So that is the quickest tutorial I could possibly think of on how to build your own little MBT style, really just cheap and quick and easy vehicle. I think a lot of people have been just trying to make it as big and as bad as possible, but that doesn't work out too well for me in my experience with Sprocket. So hopefully this taught you something, maybe on how to build your first tank and how to get it all working. So, I'm going to go ahead and end it here. If you guys did enjoy, please leave a like, any suggestions, leave them in the comments down below. Enjoy the channel, enjoy what I'm doing. Please subscribe, it helps out a lot. And right now, shares help the channel the most. So if you do want to help the channel, please share this episode with a friend. Thanks for stopping by, thanks for sticking around, and until next time, peace.